Well, g'day guys. Welcome to the podcast. This is Life in the Peloton and I'm Mitch Stocker, your host, and the podcast is being brought to you by MAAP. Now, this month, MAAP are kicking off a global series of environmentally conscious rides because we all like to think outside is free. Well, it isn't. If you want to continue to benefit from Mother Nature's wonder, we must invest in its future. Now, these rides aim to put a spotlight on worthy causes and organisations and connect interested individuals and environmental partners in your area to support the wild and natural places we love to ride in. Start by creating a ride, any ride that aims to bring awareness to the local environmental issue you're passionate about. Go across to maap.cc to read more about the Help Wanted program and how you can be involved too. Now, you've heard me chat about the mountain bike enduro over the last few weeks. It's been a whirlwind experience. Getting a big bike, the stump jumper from Specialized, then training with Vandy up at Mount Macedon, to then jumping on a plane and heading over to Nelson, New Zealand to ride the real stuff, the legit double black diamond runs, and then finally compete in the enduro event, the New Zealand Mountain Bike Rally. That was our last two episodes. If you haven't caught up on them, I recommend to go back and have a listen because if you're not a mountain biker, you will learn a hell of a lot about this awesome culture this bloody addictive form of cycling has. Now, along the way, I meet up with Matt Fairbrother. And look, he's kind enough to take me under his wing to not only teach me a thing or two about going downhill, but as we travel across from Christchurch to Nelson, we get chatting about his unique spin he's put on the enduro mountain bike world. Now, Matt, he goes downhill quick. He's absolutely world class. But a few years ago, out of necessity, he was wanting to compete at the highest level in the EWS, and he just packed up his stuff and went overseas and bike packed his way around the series. Can you even imagine what I'm talking about? Bike packing at the world level, not club level, not national, World Cup. He's competing against the best in the world in enduro, so pedaling up and down the hills all day. Then he packs up his gear on his big suspension bike and off the road he plods to the next World Cup. He's just totally mad. Look, I actually rode home from a World Tour race once when I was racing overseas in my last year. It was only a two-nighter. The racing was done and I didn't have to compete on the other end, so I was just riding home. Pretty simple. Plus I was on my road bike and everyone thought I was mad. I still can't even really fathom it. I've seen photos of him doing it. He's on this massive bike, these big fat tyres, suspension, carrying his full face helmet strapped on the back and all the rest of his gear, just plodding along for a few thousand kilometres for weeks on end, with a few World Cups slotted in between as well. Now, like I said, I recorded this episode on our way from Christchurch to Nelson because we were on our way to the New Zealand Mountain Bike Rally and Matt took on the rally as well, but fully unsupported. If you heard the last episode, you'll understand a little bit more about this event, but essentially for us free riders, we were getting shuttled every day. We were getting shuttled from the hotels out to the mountain bike parks, then a little bit up the hills as well. We also had to pedal a little bit, but Matt did it all. He slept under the stars. He rode between the mountain bike parks. He rode up and down the hills every day. Plus he was carrying his food, his water, everything. He did all this as he was racing the rest of us down the hills as well. And he still won the bloody thing. Now, this episode is being brought to you by HVMN Ketone IQ as well. I'm really enjoying this stuff, guys, because I'm using it all the time. Early morning exercising, sitting here, working on the computer or recording a podcast. I love the state that it puts me in mentally and physically. So, Ketone IQ. It's from HVMN, Health via Modern Nutrition, who were the world's first to launch a drinkable ketone to the public. Ketones are a highly efficient energy source, especially for our brains. This is actually when I'm noticing it the most, when I'm having Ketone IQ, the cognitive effect it's having on me. Before we had the drinkable Ketone IQ, the only way to use ketones for fuel was by fasting or exercising to put yourself in a glycogen depleted state and therefore forcing the body into a stage called ketogenesis, which converts fats into a usable energy source known as ketones. But now with Ketone IQ, we have it available as a supplement to take whenever we need it. And within minutes, you'll have ketones in your bloodstream. Look, I've said it before, and it's really obvious to see, I think, that over 60% of the pro Peloton are using Ketone IQ. It's allowing these guys to have this extra fuel source to use during the racing, and we're seeing these guys going faster for longer. Plus, it's helping these guys in recovery process. So they're coming back stronger and faster day after day. You can definitely see it. Go and try it for yourself. Head across to ketone.com/lifeinthepeloton to get 30% off your first order so you can try it and see and feel the difference. That's ketone.com/lifeinthepeloton. Now, just before we get to this episode, I want to ask you one question. Who here listening doesn't love good sleep or just simply need it? Look, I'm not cranking out hours and hours of sleep these days. There's just a bit too much going on between getting 3 little kids to bed, trying to have a cheeky glass of wine with the missus, and then getting up early in the morning to get something done before the munchkins wake up again. And here we go on repeat over and over. So my time in bed needs to be quality. That's where Pillar kicks in. Research shows that by having Pillar's triple magnesium, it elevates higher levels of magnesium in the body, which are associated with better sleep, longer sleep times, and less tiredness during the day. I've also found that by having the triple magnesium, it's really helping with falling asleep faster and stopping me waking up earlier than I intended. Pillar is an Australian sports micronutrition company developing products that intersect between pharmaceutical intervention and sports supplements for athletes. Now, the things that keep us going while we're out there, exercising or racing, like electrolytes or carbohydrate products, well, these are the things that get us to the finish line. Pillar's mission is to get you and athletes to the start line in the best possible condition over and over again. That's talking about recovery and sleep. Now, I've been taking it 30 minutes before bed each night. Now, if you'd like to try Pillar today, head across to pillarperformance.shop and use the code LITP for 15% off your first order, or for the USA listeners, head across to thefeed.com/pillar. Guys, seriously, go across and try this. Try it for yourself, prove me wrong, or just see, because I know you're not going to. You're going to really love this. You're going to sleep better. You're going to tell me, why didn't I try this earlier? That's pillarperformance.shop. All right, guys, let's go. Matthew Fairbrother, the all-round biker. I hope you enjoy. So, enduro is about riding as well as going downhill.
Yeah, exactly.
But you have taken it to the next level. And you can tell me a little bit about this, but I wanted to specifically talk about, I guess, firstly, bike packing between the enduro races and how that sort of morphed into a different world, sort of a world that I'm a bit more closer to, a world that I'm a bit more attuned to is going for FKTs, fastest known time. And, guys that I'm friends with and race with, Lachlan Morton, he does a lot of these things as well, long, epic trips, sometimes going for the adventure, sometimes just trying to do stuff that people have never done. Then also sometimes doing it the fastest person that's ever done. Let's talk about this where it's sort of, I want to talk about the enduro stuff before that, but then maybe later. But let's talk about this last bit. Well, not last bit, but this where it's morphed to for you.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of came out on the scene, became known for bike packing between the EWS World Cups. So somewhat that was out of necessity to begin with, but then it turned into a challenge and I started to go as quick as I could between these World Cups, and I was pushing myself hard and going as quick as I could, biking as far as I could, getting almost no sleep, and that eventually kind of morphed into, I think most people were thinking that I was some kind of bike packing long distance athlete, and then also myself even believing that that was what I had potential in, and potentially that was what I was becoming.
You started to actually think that. Were you looking to guys like the guys that like a Lachlan Morton or these road riders that were going across to gravel? Were you looking at that area, or you just didn't know about any other guys?
I think I knew where my advantages and disadvantages were, I guess we could say. So I was kind of more looking at events I thought I could do well at, and they would be the events which are more technical, and I thought I could take my knowledge of the technical side of mountain biking in terms of descending to that kind of discipline, and I thought I maybe had a better package than potentially some other athletes who focus on that had. But keep in mind, I actually had no idea where I stood in that discipline. I'd never competed in an event. I didn't know anyone who was competing in those events. I only had my performances of biking between these EWSs to go off, and to be honest, I think going off those stats I had, off the distances I biked, and I could bike on for days, I thought I was actually going to be quite good at that discipline. And I think Sonaway did some sponsors, and also just, I guess, the community. And I had all these comments of like, why don't you go do the Tour Divide, and saying, oh, you'd be so good at that. And in a way, I think it maybe fed the ego negatively, and thought, this is, I'm just going to be a boss at this, and this is what I'm made for, maybe, to a certain extent. And in the end,
let's talk about one of those adventures then, like the Highland 550 in Scotland, is it?
Yeah, so I think it's worth kind of maybe talking about the lead up to that, and even the lead up to these bike packing between all the EWSs overseas, and the fact that this was never a focus of mine. I never went out specifically to go get fit for that. It was maybe just a gift I've had. I bike lots, and that's all it is.
Do you think it's a physical gift, or you think it's a mental gift?
I think it's both. I'd say maybe more on the mental side. I think I'm quite in tune with my mind, but on the other side of that, you have to be happy to stay on a bike for 24 hours or whatever in a sitting. But even leading up until this first attempt at this bike packing kind of challenge, I never went out with a focus on getting fit for that. It was just I turned up and went and did it, which in the end didn't work out well for me. So I had my eyes on the Highland 550 in Scotland, and I think worldwide it's known as one of the more tough bike packing events, circuits, and that's exactly why I chose it. It's meant to be super technical, lots of hiker bike, lots of walking, lots of technical descending, and I thought that suited me perfect.
The weather, pretty dicey.
Yeah, I mean, the weather in Scotland, it's typically wet, so I think, you've got to expect it to be wet. I think that's another part. I just hoped I had good luck and it was going to be sunny, and I thought I had enough gear when I didn't, and that's another mistake. I didn't test my gear for those conditions, so that's a lesson as well. But I went out too hard, too quick, and then just paid the cost. And that on day one I would have been leading, and then I just slowly got slower and slower as the weather and I guess myself got caught up. My body started to slow down, and it didn't go so well. And in the end, I got caught between two passes as a storm came in. The wind was super bad. I couldn't move forward, and I didn't have energy to push forward either. And I should have just turned back, but I was so tired at that point, I didn't have that thought, and almost ended in a hypothermia kind of situation. And luckily I got a message. I had a team following my Garmin GPS, and they told me there was a bothy, a mountain hut kind of close by. So luckily I got that message, and luckily I got to that hut and good shelter. But on my side there's a whole lack of, I guess, fitness for the pace I was going, a whole lack of knowledge for that circuit, lack of knowledge for the sport, and a whole lot of way too much ambition.
I guess, there's so many things I want to unpack out of that. Let's just quickly go back to that moment, the moment when you were out there, the realization, and it would have been building for a while, the realization of, what have I got myself into here? And I've been there myself, and I'm not saying to that extent, but you keep pushing forward, and there's obvious moments where you could bail out, but it's this weird mentality that once you get over that bit there, it's going to be a bit better, and that'll be easier, and you just keep going, and you just should have turned back hours ago. Take me to that moment then, in between those two passes, before you realised the hut was there. What was going through your mind then?
Well, it was, I kind of got myself locked in this situation of there was kind of no going back at this point when I figured out that it was going to be bad. And then it was almost like survival instincts at that moment, because I just had no energy. My legs were done. I also had some issues with my feet. I just couldn't walk, and it was becoming quite dire. It was becoming night. The storm didn't seem to be getting any worse. So
any worse or any better?
Any better, my bad. And to get out of this situation, I had to climb over a mountain. Even to get to this bothy, when I learned about that, I still had to climb up and over the mountain. So
were you freaking out? Were you panicking?
I think I wasn't panicking, but I knew how bad things could be, and I knew that I just needed to get out of there. So what I did is I had maybe food for up to the next day. So I actually had all of my gels in that moment. So I had maybe about 9 gels in one hit. And
what was that like, getting it down?
I don't actually find it that bad. I don't think.
Were you pretty hungry anyway?
Yeah, and I think I knew I needed sugar, and I also, I don't know why, and I don't know if this is actually a fact, but I thought that if I just made my gut work, if I made the inside of my body work, it would heat me up. So I just had as much food as I could with still saving some for later, just to get myself warm and to get myself moving. I was shaking, couldn't stop myself shaking. It was getting quite bad, and I was getting quite scared. And then I kept hiking along, just taking small steps or whatever, and it started to become night, and I started to hallucinate quite bad. There were some big boulders up on that mountain, and they just kept turning into little mountain huts. They kept turning into buildings, these big boulders. And
I'm there, yes.
They were like, yeah, and I kept and then when I shone my headlight onto these big boulders, they just turn into boulders, and that the hut would disappear. That's something I've got vividly in my head. And I made it to the top of the hill, and then I needed to descend onto the other side. That's actually when I started to panic, because I couldn't feel my hands, I couldn't feel my feet, I could barely walk, and I couldn't bike down this hill. I couldn't slow myself down. I couldn't use my fingers to pull the lever, and I knew if I fell off, if I hurt myself, that actually could have been my life, basically. So I slowly plodded my way down the hill, and this is a super technical hill. It was hard to walk. Some bits were flat, but I could get on the bike and just coast. And then all of a sudden, I came into signal, and then on my Garmin, I actually got a text that came up on my Garmin that was my mum saying that keep pushing, we love you. And then I just burst into tears. I don't think I've ever been so emotional. And then I honestly think that's kind of the last push that kept me going, kept me tough in that moment. And I made it to that.
How far was the hut from there?
It was maybe 5 minutes, but I didn't actually know it was 5 minutes away, but it wasn't that far, but it kept me going.
And also then the next challenge starts. It wasn't over at the hut.
Yeah, so I made it to the hut anyway. I took off all my clothes because they were soaking wet and they were keeping me cold. So I was in the hut, just in my boxes, and I was just cuddled up in a ball, just shaking. And I ended up, I don't know why, but I was coughing up blood. I couldn't inhale any air, and I was shaking, and I just stayed shaking all night, until eventually actually someone came in and checked on me in the morning. Got in about 9 a.m. I was just in a completely out of it state, and I feel like it was quite close to being a lot worse than that.
Did you have anything to warm you up at all, sleeping bag or anything?
The only thing I had was an emergency bivvy, so just a metallic blanket kind of thing. Other than that, all my clothes were soaked, and I didn't have enough, which is another lesson.
Wow.
We are speaking bikepacking in this episode with Matt Fairbrother, and we're finding out that it doesn't make any difference what bike you're on, it's all bikepacking. And my go-to when it comes to bikepacking gear is Restrap. Still handmade out of Yorkshire. These guys have been working away at a cool new little product that doesn't get strapped onto your bike, but it gets strapped right onto you. I'm talking about their new hydration vest, which has been meticulously designed and developed with direct feedback from a team of their ambassadors, real adventurers out there riding every day to build a comfortable, lightweight hydration pack to go the distance. It is designed specifically for fueling you on the bike. You know what it's like, or you can imagine when you're out there riding all day long, long distances, and you're carrying that extra food with you in your bags on your bike. You don't want to be stopping every hour to get something out. So this now is perfect. It comes also with a 2-litre bladder. It's got some extra stretchy mesh pockets on the back and the front so you can load them up with goodies, and a little safety whistle too. Another great feature is its night visibility with reflective zips, pulls, logos and webbing so you'll be seen when you're out there at night. Plus there's an extra loop on the back as well to connect your own light to be seen too. This race hydration vest was specifically made for on-bike use, but I'm finding myself using it all the time. If I'm out mountain biking or going on small hikes, if I'm also out trail running, and even when I'm out there working all day on some trails in the forest. It's so easy to move in, you have the stuff right there, and it's got the easy adjustment straps to make it fit exactly how you want. Head across to restrap.com and check this new vest out, plus all their other amazing bags, and use the code PELO10 for a cheeky discount. That's restrap.com, restrap.com. And guess what? For our Aussie listeners, how exciting is this? Restrap have now opened their Australian specific store where you can now order stuff in Australian dollars, and it's going to be shipped straight out to you that much faster. That is au.restrap.com. Now let's get back out on the road and hear a little bit more from our friend, Matt Fairbrother.
We got to rewind, I guess, and understand, how do you get to here? You know, how do you get to this point where you're like, I'm ready for this kind of challenge. I'm psychologically ready. Like you said, build the ego up, you're starting to feel good. Let's rewind back to the EWS. And even before that, I guess here in New Zealand, about going across. Tell me a little bit about how the whole idea of, you know, you heading across overseas to do the EWS came about.
I think I was pushing myself quite hard in New Zealand and was at a fairly high level within New Zealand, and it kind of got to the point where maybe I felt that I'd plateaued and that I thought I wanted to push harder and go to a higher level. And what actually kind of initiated that was the EWS was meant to come to New Zealand and Tasmania that year, but unfortunately they ended up getting cancelled due to COVID. So that was my big goal that I was working towards. And then they got cancelled, so it was a big kick in the guts, and it's like, oh, what do I do now? And in my mind, the next logical step was just to commit to the whole thing, to go like way overseas to the UK and the EU, and commit to kind of doing half a season or even a full season was the ambition. So that was then the goal. I ended up doing school online for the second half of that year, so I could work full time. So I was working 5 days a week as a bike mechanic, and then 1 day a week at another place as a bike mechanic as well. So working some big weeks to get money. I only had a few months to save up, and then eventually I bought all my tickets and all that.
What did your mum and dad think about you doing this? Because how old were you? 17?
I was 17 at the time. Yeah. I mean, I think I kept it quiet. Maybe like, I don't know, made them think that it was like all quite well organized, and made them think I knew what I was doing. Well, I think in my mind I thought it was super easy, but you know, there's so many things that I didn't think of just because I didn't know. Like, I'd only been to Aussie when I was maybe 4 or 5, so in my mind that barely counts. I don't know what like going overseas entails. I'd never been anywhere that you needed to speak another language. I just hadn't dealt with
Thought of those things, yeah.
No, exactly. And I mean, I had thought about the language thing, but I just thought like, oh, I'll just use my fingers and sign language and just make it up as I go. And
everyone else does it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like, it can be as easy as that, but you kind of forget about like how hard it is to maybe organize things or solve conflicts if there's an issue with something, or like there's so many simple things which turn into quite hard things. Just because of that language situation, or as I found out later on, like just my age, not being 18, I can't purchase so many things. I can't book things like getting on a boat as an example, or getting on a vehicle or stuff like that. Like, I wasn't technically an adult, so I had limitations because of my age, and I also just had no money. Yeah.
So you saved up this money to go across to first America?
I started in the UK.
It was enough money to realistically get you there, was it?
It was. So I'd bought my flight tickets there, bought them home. I'd paid to enter all these events, and then after that I was left with maybe a couple $1,000 New Zealand to live for maybe, I think, a few months. I think 4 months actually it was between my flights, and then to survive on a couple $1,000. So to me that was like the most money I'd ever had. That seemed like a huge amount of money. Like, I don't know, back to when you first started work and you get your first paycheck, that's like, whoa, that's a lot of money. But
how much had you saved up? About 10 grand?
But then most of that goes, like half of that's almost flights, and then you got to enter, that's a couple $1,000 into these events, and then all these other things you wouldn't even think of that, I don't know, I hadn't been exposed to adult life, I guess. So there's all these these other expenses that I never knew of that now I'm having to pay for myself because my mum and dad aren't there.
Okay.
So yeah, that money goes quick, and then you've also got to go like all over the place over there. Like, and I had no money, I had no connections. Like I flew over there by myself, didn't know anyone there, had no vehicle. Wasn't even old enough to have a license then.
What'd you do when you landed in the UK? Where did you fly into?
Well, actually, I flew into Scotland, and then I met Deviate, who are my bike sponsor. So I met the team there, and then after that, I was basically just on my own. But that was kind of, Scotland was the best place to kind of start with, because I had that small connection there, but that was only based in Scotland, I guess. So after that, I went overseas with the idea that I'd find someone that had a van, that had a spare seat, that could take me to the next event. But
you had an idea of it, or you'd actually made contact with someone?
I hadn't made contact with anyone because I didn't know anyone.
Yeah, right.
But I thought, I'm going to be at this event, there's going to be heaps of like-minded people. I'd seen like on social media all these people in vans. Like, I thought it'd be simple, but I got there and I was too scared to talk to people. And actually, like a few days before that first event, I bumped into Win Masters, who, if you don't know him, he's like an iconic mountain biker, also a Kiwi, and he was like a somewhat an idol, I guess, for me. So I was chatting to him, and I was amazed that I was chatting to him, and he was like asking my plans, and I was like, oh yeah, I don't have any plans. And he asked how I was going to get to the next EWS in Slovenia, and I was like, oh, I don't know, haven't sorted that out. And he's like, oh, you should just bike there, like jokingly. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So I said I'll do it. Like, he thought I was joking, and I took that on as not a joke.
How far was that?
Well, the thing is, when I said yes to that, I had no idea. So yeah,
hey, it can't be too far.
Like, I had no idea about any other places in the world other than New Zealand's. So I just said yes, and ended up being 1.8 thousand kilometers, and I had, I think, 12 days to do it. And yeah, after that, that was kind of it.
Did you get excited about the idea at the beginning, or was
I think yeah, it was something new. It was a challenge, and I think I'm aware enough of the maybe business side of it, you could say, that I knew there was going to be a positive kind of outlook on it in terms of exposure. So I was like, this can't go badly. Like, I've just spoke to my idol, and he's going to be like stoked on it. He's going to be like, whoa, you actually did it.
Well, if no one else cares, at least Wim does.
Yeah, exactly. And then beyond that, hopefully, it gets picked up on the media. And yeah, I went and did it. There were a few hurdles within that. Like, as I said before, I couldn't get on the boat, which I think it was, England to Netherlands. I couldn't board that boat, and that ended up being a whole scandal where I had to call my mum and dad at like 2 a.m. in New Zealand it was, and get them to send over photocopies of their passport and email them saying I had permission to get on the boat. And that was
an ordeal.
Yeah, that was definitely an ordeal, and there was a lot of panic there.
Was it a fair chunk of Ks just to get to the boat already?
That was the small leg. So I did that over one night, and then the next morning.
Had you had any experience of doing these long distance rides before then?
So this was my first time bike packing. I've never bike packed before this.
So did you have bags and stuff?
No, I had to panic buy bags.
Just around the corner, like, hey, does anyone know a bike packing place?
So actually, the owner of DVA, I told him about it and told him how much of a panic it was, and he went to Glasgow and bought me some bags. So he actually made the whole thing happen.
Were they good bags?
They worked, yeah, definitely worked.
Yeah.
They weren't
what you would use now.
It was all I knew then, so it was like perfect. But now that I've done it a bit, I'd changed that setup, and I have changed it.
What about the bike? Because you've just finished the EWS, and how'd you go in that first one?
So that one I finished 12th in. So 12th and under 21 in the world. So like to start, I also had a mechanical. I snapped my hanger So I did the last stage chainless. So like to finish 12th on that, I just couldn't believe it. And then, but at the same time, I never had time for that to settle in. It was just on to fixing my bike firstly, and then it was on to packing my bags and then going.
Did you have to ditch a lot of belongings from that?
I did actually, and it's funny now that I look back on it, but that was actually what forced me to go and talk to people, because I then had to find someone who could take my stuff. So it was only after the fact that I'd committed to biking there that I got the confidence to go and talk to someone to ask them for help, which I should have done in the first place.
And they would have been like, yeah, I can take you as well. Yeah,
exactly.
So did you do anything to your bike in the beginning there, or is that something that morphed over the time as you started to alter your mountain bike? Because you got to remember that you're doing it on this full-on big downhill bike as well.
Yeah, so the only change I made was slick tyres. So
you went out and bought slick tyres.
So Wind Masters actually went and asked all of the teams for me if anyone had warm-up tyres, and he managed to find some for me.
Warm-up tyres?
Warm-up so quite a few of at least on the downhill side, at the top of the hill, they'll have like a warm-up bike
on rollers?
Yeah, exactly, and they'll have slick tyres on it.
Huh?
So yeah, I think Win knew a few teams that may have had those and went and asked for me.
So you changed the tyres out?
Yeah, so I changed my big downhill tyres to slick tyres, and that was the only change.
And the bike was still all, like, you didn't lock the suspension out?
Oh, yeah, lock the suspension out, but I didn't swap any other parts out.
So is the suspension, when you lock it out like that, is it pretty rigid, or it's still got a bit of play in it?
So when you lock it out, all that changes is the damping. So that kind of means it's going to move slower, but it still sags down as much. So it does help, but it's not like a plank of wood. You've still got that bounce, but it's toned down a lot.
So the first day you're rolling out, we were all like giggles and smiling, like, whoa, this is going to be a fun adventure? Or you were sort of a bit down on it at the start and you grew into it?
I think I was happy on it. Yeah, I think I was stoked, and I was definitely scared. Like, didn't know how things were going to go, but I think that unknown kind of made me excited.
How were you navigating?
So I got told about this app Komoot, and I just plotted in where I was and plotted where I wanted to be, and it made me up this map, and I just followed that using my phone. And it was, I'd say 90% of the time it was good, but other times it took me to dead ends and into all these like parks and bushes and bush bashing and stuff, but most of the time it was solid.
Where were you sleeping?
That first night I was too tired to set up my tent, which ended up being a mistake, because I just slept out in the open in the bushes off the side of the motorway, I guess, and I just got attacked by these midges, these bugs, and I woke up just like covered in bites and like welts. But that whole next week wasn't fun because I was so itchy and just so uncomfortable. Yeah, that was another lesson learned.
So you get across the pond and you're over in Europe now, and you're coming through Holland and places that you've never been to before. Was that sort of a really cool way to discover Europe on your way to Slovenia? Pretty cool route down there.
I was so scared. Once again, I never dealt with that language thing. This was the first time I was going to have to deal with language. I just did my best not to talk to anyone. Like, I would avoid contact with anyone. I don't want to stop anywhere. So I didn't actually eat much. And when I did, it was just like gas stations, just to avoid having to have a conversation with someone. Just like, I just piled stuff up on the counter and just showed my card, and that was it. So yeah, I didn't eat much and just didn't get much energy. Didn't stop to take in sights.
What about when you're just riding along though, enjoying sort of the countryside, or were you more just focused on the task at hand?
I think I was just focused on the task at hand. I think I was on a mission to do it as fast as I could, because I didn't know what lay ahead of me, and I didn't know something would happen which would slow me down. So I just wanted to get as much distance in the bag as possible early on and just keep moving forward.
So 1800k, did you make it in time for the next round?
Yeah, so I made it there in, I think it was 6 days. So I made it there quite early. Yeah, I don't know what the motive for that was, because I was pushing to go as fast as I could, and I made it there quite early. I did some huge days. I barely slept, and I made it there early and had some time off to chill out. But yeah, I got there, and I even actually stopped off at a downhill World Cup on the way to watch that.
Was it on the way, or you went out?
It was a small detour. Not much of a detour, but yeah.
And so when you got there, what were the people saying who saw you ride out, especially Wim, but also these other people that you sort of probably heard about it? Was it starting to get some traction about this guy who was riding on the on the enduro bike. Were you frothing on that? Was it helping you?
It was kind of funny because at that first one in Scotland, like no one actually knew about it. I hadn't told anyone. I think Win only picked up. I think it only kind of went live on Win's. He's got a YouTube show where he goes and interviews people. So he interviewed me on that, and that's kind of the only time it came out. So then by the time I got to the next EWS in Slovenia, like I got there and it just felt weird because I knew people were talking about me and turning their heads, and it was quite weird because no one was talking to me, but I knew people were talking about me.
Even I heard about it. I remember I was in my last year of racing and I remember talking to a couple of riders about it. Like, have you heard about this guy? I didn't even know what EWS was. And I'm like, have you heard about this guy? And I'm like, on a proper big downhill bike. I'm like, who is this guy? And I just saw the photo of the thing for me that made it legit was whether this was the same time or not, but you had the full face helmet with you.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is nuts. I think the helmet for me confirmed that you were a proper downhill rider. Without that, I would have been like, yeah, but it was just like, no, he's carrying all his gear with him.
Yeah, it had all the gear. Yeah, it was all on me.
So tell me about, I guess from there then you started to ride the rest of the series, and now it's sort of, I guess it probably changed a little bit from a necessity. It was still a necessity, but I'm sure you could have worked out a lift now, but now it's just something you wanted to do.
Yeah, exactly. It turned into something. Like, I wanted to push myself to see how far I could go, and to be completely honest, I saw the benefits in terms of exposure aspect, and kind of knew if I did it well, it could turn into something. And so yeah, I kept biking between them all, and I finished the season biking between all the events.
How did it affect your performance?
Quite significantly. I think it was at that second one in Slovenia, I was stuffed, but I think I actually managed to perform quite well there, I think because I was stoked on it all at that point. So I finished 10th in that second one after biking that distance, but after that it kind of all fell apart. I think the tiredness definitely hit me, the motivation fell. And
the motivation for the events or to do the bike packing?
I think just all of it. I got put off bikes in a way.
Yeah.
Like, it's so much bikes, you're pushing yourself so hard, and it's hard to see like why you're doing it. But I'm so stubborn, and if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And I had no way out of it in my eyes, and I just had to get it done. And that it wasn't good as things developed. After that, I was maybe getting places within maybe the mid-40s, and then there was a big gap after that, and then it went to Canada, which I actually had to fly to because I wasn't going to swim over the ocean. But yeah, I then, after a big gap there, I finished 10th again, and it was like, oh yeah, I've still got it.
I'm just too tired.
Yeah, and then I kept biking after that, and I was just not doing good again, so...
Is this maybe where this idea sort of started to think like, or maybe I am just a bike packing guy?
Yeah, potentially, like, because I was still, even when I was tired, I was still able to perform in terms of bike packing. I could still bike all night, I could still bike these distances. So that never seemed to actually suffer, and it definitely didn't suffer as much as my performance biking downhill. So yeah, maybe that was kind of where I started to think, oh, maybe this is actually what I'm made for.
I want to talk to you about one specific ride that I saw you do. It was through Europe, 50k outside of Carcassonne, across to Chambéry, 680k, 5,500 meters of vert, 50 hours out there and 35 hours ride time. This is the sort of rides you were doing. Do you remember this ride specifically?
Yeah, I think that's like the last one I did overseas, I believe.
Yeah. Tell me about this ride, and like this is just one of many. This is one of the bigger ones. For me, that's like, a few stages, but that's more or less in one go, isn't it?
Yeah, so that was, I think I had 4 days to do that distance. Basically, I think it was quite close to the Spanish border, all the way over to the other side, over by, I think, Geneva.
It is. It's right near Geneva. So you're just on the other side of the Pyrenees, and you cut right across to Geneva, yeah.
Yeah, so I think the idea was just I hadn't been performing well, and I thought, like, I've almost got nothing to lose. I know I'm not going to perform well at the other end, so I might as well do my best to perform well in this bike packing aspect. So I just went to do it, as quick as I could. Although the plan at first was still to sleep, but I ended up just not sleeping well. And then I think I maybe had 2 2-hour blocks of sleep just to kind of keep myself alert, and then just kept on pushing.
Why don't you, I know you're riding to an event, and maybe that's the draw for you, that you've got to be to a place, and it's got to be, you're going to another enduro event. But why don't you ride a different bike now, on these adventures? When you say you got nothing to lose, and just do it. I see the speed, 12k an hour, that would do my head in.
Yeah.
I don't know how you don't get over the bike. It's just something you're comfortable on.
I think to me, I'm a mountain biker, and to do it on another bike that isn't a mountain bike isn't genuine to me.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm not competing against anyone. I'm the only person doing this. There's no one else I need to beat. There's no one else I need to be quicker than. So to me, that's who I am. And that's it. It's not a competition. I just want to do it.
Well, let's talk about then when it's sort of morphed into this weird sort of phase for you, and sort of maybe using your words, maybe not mine, maybe not right either. Even the UTMB challenge, I saw the ultra trail around Mont Blanc racing Kilian Jornet, trying to beat his time, and I feel like now it's something different. Before you were riding to the next stage of EWS, you're not racing anyone, it's just up to you. You're racing yourself, and there's a different thing in that. You're still very competitive, but there's no loss either. No one knows if you go 10 minutes slower or an hour faster or whatever. It's just you, and you're happy with it or you're not happy with it. You see your own finish line. When did it sort of morph into this next phase where you're like, okay, I'm going to try and beat other people, I'm going to try and beat other records, or maybe riding a slightly different bike than a full enduro bike? Tell me about how it morphed into something else.
I think so. This was last year, along with that Highlands 550, that bikepacking attempt. I think last year was kind of a phase where I explored a bit more, and maybe found out who I was and what I'm meant to be, or what I'm meant to do, and what I enjoy also. So that was a part of that, and this challenge to do the Tour de Mont Blanc, and see if I could beat Kilian Jornet's time, who did the loop on foot, was given to me by a sponsor, and I jumped on board on that. I thought that was a super cool idea, because
it is a cool idea. I like it. Yeah,
there's I think about 9,000 meters of climbing in the slope, and it's the climbing is savage. You're hiking up the hill, so obviously Kilian, who's on foot, is going to be quicker than me, but then biking down the hill, I know I can be so much quicker than him. So
was it technical trails for you?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Yeah, definitely technical.
And were you on a different bike, or was I wrong?
I was on my normal bike, but I had XC tires.
Okay, right. So that's why it looks slightly different, but it still had the same amount of suspension and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not an XC bike. There would be a quicker bike for the challenge, but
again, you want to stay true to who you are.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm definitely not the quickest person who could have done that circuit, but at the same time, I think the idea to see if I could beat Kilian Jornet's time, that was definitely more of a marketing angle to kind of hook people in. But at the same time, it was a fun goal for me to work out, is it possible? Because I didn't know the answer to that question, and I think it's, as a mountain bike, I think that's a question we all want to know. Is it are you quicker to do a loop on foot or by bike? Because it's as a mountain biker on a big mountain bike, it's quite annoying to see these people passing us on foot going up a hill. There's nothing worse than that. I went and found the answer to that question out, and I was slower by about an hour. But I did have some personal body issues. I got a bit sick. So for me, I didn't beat him, but I think I answered the question that it's definitely possible.
What about riding that loop? Aside from now, I guess I want to get into sort of the psychological stuff now, because I guess when you were doing these rides from each city to get to the next EWS, there was this massive psychological game, going all night, pushing yourself faster than you needed to be. You were testing the waters, you're understanding a lot about yourself. So then when it came to these challenges, these races, if you want to call it, these ultra races, was it the similar sort of feeling, tapping into this mindset to push yourself and go all night and go when you're tired, to go these long distances, or was it a different sort of feeling?
I think I have a thing which I think maybe is good sometimes, but bad in other circumstances, but as soon as I get an idea, if I'm scared of it, if I don't like it, that's when I commit to that idea. I go do it. I'm a big believer that like what you want is hiding behind what you're avoiding. So I'm always gonna search for those things I'm avoiding and commit to them and do them. And I think when I like think of an idea of like, oh, should I push harder? Should I stay awake another couple hours? In that moment, I've instantly got to commit to that harder option. And that's just how I've always been. And I'm so stubborn in that aspect. And it's got me in some bad situations, as you kind of heard before. But that's kind of how I work. And that's, I think, why I'm always pushing and always making things hard for myself.
All right, Matt, let's go right back to the beginning, because we know about when you went overseas and that journey over there and that transition from just sort of pumping around on a bike in the bike parks in New Zealand. But let's go right back to the beginning. How did you get on a bike?
So yeah, I've had wheels like all my life. When I was younger, I had a little moto, and then kind of moved into the city, didn't have a motorbike anymore. And then it was maybe until I was 10 when my older sibling got into mountain biking at high school, and I guess I saw that and thought it would be a good sport to get involved into. So
how old were you at that point?
I was about 10 at that time, and he would have been about, I don't know, a few years older than me. So he started getting out, and then he ended up pulling my dad out as well, who had a mountain bike and used to be into cycling. And then I saw that, and I guess I started to follow them out into the hills, and it took a while for me to kind of catch up to their fitness and skill levels. And
fitness was a part of it.
Yeah. So close to my house, there's a plantation called Bottle Lake, and it's just like a flat XC loop, about 10k, and that was the go-to for them.
So your dad and your brother are a little bit more on the fitness side of things rather than the pure downhill stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where it started. And then I think my siblings started to kind of head towards the hills, go more downhill, because at that kind of point in time, it was just seen as more cool, you know. And I was watching that, but I knew I didn't have the skill for that. So I then kind of just picked up, I guess, jumping. I built these like sketchy jumps down in the park, and just started doing some small dirt jumps, and kind of that's how I built up my base level of skill, was just messing about on these small jumps.
With friends or?
Yeah. Ended up finding some mates that were also into biking, so that's kind of how it all picked up, and just doing some jumps and messing about and being stupid. And somehow that kind of evolved to the point where I built that confidence to head up to the hill and start biking down the hill. And at that point in time, I was watching lots of stuff on YouTube, social media, of all the downhillers and stuff doing all this, you know, all the stuff you see on social media, all that wild stuff. So that kind of pulled me into it, and that's how what I wanted to do myself. So that was the start.
What about the bikes and things in the early times? You know, were you sort of on pretty good equipment, or were you just using like, you know, Target sort of second-hand bikes and just making do with what you had?
Yeah, so I started out with a super cheap hardtail, super low spec, second-hand, just bought it off Facebook Marketplace or something, and yeah, that kept me going for the first couple of years, and that thing would just fall apart so often. And then luckily my dad was quite good at bodging stuff, so it fell apart, and then we kind of bodged up a fix and it was good to go again. But yeah, that thing just completely fell apart, and I ended up getting a hand-me-down full suspension, which was just also demolished. And we did like multiple fixes on that bike and had to get it welded a couple times because it was about to snap. So yeah, the first few years it was definitely definitely had cheaper bikes. And I'd say it was only until I was a few years in where my mum and dad helped me with the big purchase of a new full suspension bike. So I think that was about $2,000 when I bought that first bike, and that was kind of when things kicked off for me, and that was when I was invested in the sport and gave it my all.
I think like as you come up with those bikes, like I had a hand-me-down road bike from my dad when I first started, and yeah, the thing was way too big for me, and you know, we got it re-sprayed and even put some STI levers on it. It used to have down tube shifters, and like realistically the thing was probably, you know, with all respect to dad, a hunk of junk, but I love that thing. It was my first road bike and it felt so fast. And I don't know, like what's your memories of those original bikes, and of course, in hindsight, now you know they're a piece of junk maybe, and like you said, they're welded together and probably all clapped out. But at the time, when you got that first dually, it was like, oh, now I've got something real good. Oh, you already knew from there, this is still pretty crap.
Yeah, I think to begin with is like, you only know what you know. And like with that hardtail I had at first, like I think I never thought that was going to hold me back. But at the same time, I think you obviously know there's better equipment out there. So it's quite easy to put the excuse of, oh, I can't do this because I don't have a fully. But I think for me, it was always a goal to be better than those kids that had the expensive bikes. And that's what I always like push for, is like, oh yeah, that kid's hitting that jump and he's got an expensive bike, so I'm going to go hit a bigger jump and show him up.
And did you?
Yeah. That bike, like, I feel like, I mean, it's a good few years ago now, but there's some stuff I feel like I'd be scared to do that I did on that bike that I just wouldn't do now. Like,
did you have some big offs?
No, not. I mean, I wasn't going fast enough to have big offs, and the jumps were they were sketchy enough where like you kind of knew you were going to fall off, so you'd be anticipating it and you'd be able to bail. So
tell me about when you got this first proper bike now, and you said you were invested in the sport. That day, the brand new bike day, that feeling. I remember again when I got my first proper road bike, the step up from the original bike from Dad, and I developed all these skills like you had from riding a shitter bike. I got stronger riding a crap bike, so it felt I was way better instantly because I had this new bike. I hadn't physically changed, but the bike got better. So then ultimately I felt the increase. Did you feel that when you got the new bike?
Yeah, so actually the first time I ever used that bike was at a downhill event. So I think at this point it may have been my second or third event. I think the first and second I worked out that the bike I had just wasn't cutting it. So as soon as I got that bike, I just jumped into this competition, and it was a huge boost of confidence. And
literally the first time you rode the bike was in the competition.
Yeah, and I just felt like a new man. Like it just feels like you've jumped up so many levels.
Yeah.
It just works. It feels good. And confidence was sky high.
Tell me about the park now in Christchurch. We've driven past it and we've spoken about it a few times. It's about, you said, about 15k from your place, and we're cruising along in your lovely abode on wheels.
Yeah.
At the moment, but you didn't have this. So tell me a little bit about that park and sort of the process of learning to go downhill, but also getting there and back. What you alluded to, what that sort of carved the path for where you are now.
Yeah. So I guess quite fortunately for me, my mum and dad were always quite passionate about me getting off like devices and just getting out and doing things outside. So they allowed me to go outside and explore. And once I got this new bike, all the gear, I just wanted to bike on it all the time.
From what age were you?
This was maybe about 14, 15.
Yep.
So the hills is about between 15 and 20 kilometers away, just depending on where I wanted to go on the hills. And I was 14, 15, 16, kind of that kind of age, and I had no car. My mum and dad were working, and they didn't want to waste like an hour or two of their day to take me to the hill. So basically, if I wanted to go biking, I had to bike about 15 or 20 kilometers each way just to get to the hill and back home. So
on this full suspension mountain bike?
Yeah, on a full suspension mountain bike, and then, then climb up and down the hill a few times. So I'd do that a few times each week, and ultimately that built up a big base level of fitness, which has been, I'm still using to this day. I guess that's what's been pushing me along for the last few years. Yeah,
I was going to say, do you think it had anything to do with the mentality? Because there comes a point, I know the fitness is a big element of that, but you had so much time to yourself to sort of tick along, decide whether you wanted to do this or not, like an hour each way before you even get to the hill. So an hour getting there, 50 minutes an hour. There's plenty of times in the afternoon after school to just go, I cannot be bothered. Like, it's just too hard basket, or even riding home after it, just going, what am I doing? Like, do you think the mentality started to form there about doing these long distance trips, that ability to just be like, that's just what I'm doing. It's just time on the road, the ability to switch off and just be at ease with, I guess, riding for long periods of time?
Yeah, I think I just love biking, and that was the cost I'd pay to go bike up and down the hill. So that was just a part of it, and I just had to do it. And it sucked most of the time, especially like biking home with a big headwind, which often happened. It was savage, but I think that mentality later turned into, as I got more invested in the sport, invested more time and energy and money into the sport, I kind of saw that as the more I did that, the more it would benefit me. So that kind of side of it being hard and sucking was like turned into kind of, if I do this more, this is going to make me better. And that hardness was benefiting me and making me a better person, a better athlete. So I think I saw the benefits of it.
Where does the, I'm probably generalizing here, but I think I'm probably correct, but where does the whole mechanic side of things come in with mountain biking? One thing I've really noticed in this scene, even in the cross-country scene, is that everyone really knows how to take care of their bikes. And I'm just thinking about you as a young kid riding to these hills and back. You'd be wearing through equipment. You'd be, maybe going down a downhill and having a bit of an off, but still realizing you need to get home. So can't just call mum and dad up. You're going to have to work out how to fix your bike, repair your bike. Is that where it all sort of starts, or someone teaches you, or how does it go? Like you're pretty handy with the mechanics of your bike.
Yeah, so I think that actually starts with having a bad bike to begin with. My first bikes just fell apart all the time, and then alongside my dad, who would do most of the mechanicking, and then I'd just be there supervising or watching. I'd be watching him fix the bikes. And most of the time he'd just be bodging things. Like it would be, it'd barely be a fix, but it would work. And in a way, I think in the early stages that was best for me, because I actually learned like why he was doing things and what for, instead of just slapping on a new part.
Yeah.
I actually like developed the understanding of the system of the bike, and just why. So I think that was a huge help for me. And now I've got a lot more support. I've got lots of new spare parts sitting in the van in case something happens. So I think for me at the moment, it would be a lot harder to develop that knowledge
afterwards,
because now I'm fortunate enough just to be able to slap on a new part and not even have to think about actually fixing something. It's just a new part and done. Whereas before that, you were just having to fix it with what you had, and I never had much money, so a new part was never an option.
You just had to make it work.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's sort of the element of these trips you do, is that you can't just pop into a bike shop or detour off or whatever. You got to make it work. And also, when you're overseas, there is no mechanic, to sort of chip in. When you get to the race, I'm sure you can sort of lean on someone, but you've got to be able to do that on most of these events, because there's not that many teams going to the EWS, is there? Or are they all teams? Or how does it work with individuals and teams?
Yeah, it's maybe half and half. So there's teams which have their mechanics and all that, and then the other half are just guys living out of their vans. So the guys living out of their vans, they're just working on their own bikes, have their own equipment and all that, and don't get a whole lot of support. In most cases, the guys on the teams, in most cases, they just don't need a thing. Their bikes get taken care of, food gets made for them, all that. So it's quite split in mountain biking at the moment.
Would that ever be a dream of yours, to be on a mountain bike team? Or you think you like it how it is?
At the moment, I don't think it would suit me. I quite like doing the work. I think I get a lot of satisfaction about starting at the beginning and then working towards the finish. And I feel like a lot of that is taken. I feel like I'm not fully focused enough on that goal of just being the quickest you possibly can to need that support. I'm a bit all over the place at the moment to have that full support, I'd say.
Well, we're on the road. We've just left Nelson. It's time to get back to Christchurch. The rally is over. I'm feeling tired just being shuttled around. It was so physical on the body. But Matt, you did it self-supported. I'm so surprised. You're driving the car right now. I'm so surprised how chipper and sort of fresh you look and feel. Or maybe not feel. Let's ask the question. You've been asked it a million times this week. Anytime someone saw you said, "How you feeling, mate?" I'm going to ask you now, how are you feeling after the 6 days on the rally?
Yeah, obviously I am quite tired, but I think I've managed it quite well. I guess the goal since the beginning was just to stay at a super low intensity, which I managed to do mostly. So the body's actually feeling quite good. I am a bit tired in terms of sleepiness. Managed maybe about 4 or 5 hours most nights, but I think, I still think I'm quite stoked on the whole week, so that's kind of keeping me alive at this point.
Let's talk about what you did there. Not necessarily about the rally per se, but I mean just the way, this is just an extension of what we were talking about the other day, like who you are as a rider. The rally is an enduro race, a different sort of race to the EWS, but a bit of the same sort of feel, a lot more shuttling than you do from what I imagine in the World Cup stuff. You can tell me in a minute if I'm right or wrong, but you are racing downhill and there's an element of riding uphill, but they try to make it as easy as possible. But you decide to bike pack it in your style, no support, and tell me a little bit about how that idea came about and why you wanted to take on this challenge.
Yeah, so I guess like the past couple of years I've been doing a mix of bike packing and then a mix of the EWS, EDR World Cups, and they only kind of happened because of each other, but they were never combined. So when I kind of came up with this idea, it just made perfect sense. It was the mix of those two things, but combined into one. And then I started thinking about it more, looked into it more, worked out that it could have been possible. And then, the excitement built up, and I ended up committing to it, got some sponsors on board to help it out, and it just happened. So yeah, it was quite successful, I'd say.
Is that, when you say the combination, you mean the combination of bike packing and racing the same thing? Because before, when you were bike packing to the EWS, they were separate in a way. You were bike packing, and then the next day you were racing with no bags and no whatever else, and it was a couple of days of actual racing. So they sort of didn't really cross over with heavy amounts of fatigue, or from what I understood, it was still elements of the same. What's the real difference?
Yeah, exactly. So in the past, at these World Cup events, I've been bike packing to the event. I get there, and then the bike packing's done. I complete the event, and then I then get back on the bike and then start bike packing again to the next venue. Whereas this one, it's completely combined. I've basically been competing with all the gear on my back, and it just kind of hasn't stopped. Like, as soon as I finished the competition in that day, I've then got a bike to the next location for the next day's event, and then that's been going on for 6 days in this case.
How did it take it up another notch? Like, from what I understood, like those trips you were doing that we spoke about in Europe, they were big too. They were huge days, the 52-hour day, 52-hour ride or whatever it was, that massive cross country to get to the event. You were so fatigued anyway doing these World Cups, because you're not going to recover in a day or a night before you start the next World Cup. How did it differ? Like, how was the fatigue greater? How was the pressure to make, I don't know, because we did have time cuts and you had to set up the next day, and thinking about how I'd get forward so I'd be ahead of the group so you get there before they checked in and not get stuck in the crowd. What were the differences to what you'd done before?
Yeah, I think in the past challenges I've done, they've kind of been two of their own things. So at first the focus would be on bike packing, just getting there, and then after that the focus would just be on completing the event to the best of my abilities and going as quick as I could. But with this one, I think the big change was that whilst I was bike packing, I was having to think of how I could do it best. Like, I'm gonna have to take this hill super easy so that when I wake up in the morning, my legs are gonna be okay. Or on this stage, I'm gonna have to take it super easy so that I'm not tired for the next huge climb, because I've got a huge pedal to do this evening to make it to the next day's location. So it was a lot more about staying consistent and making sure that my body kind of stayed happy. Like, I couldn't go all in like I typically would overseas with these other bike packing missions I've done in the past.
Did that change it, like, for you? Like, did you like it better or worse?
I think it was a lot more engaging mentally and a lot more fun. It was a lot more of a puzzle. Yeah, it wasn't just like putting my head down and getting it done. It was being thoughtful and having a lot of patience and intent, I guess. Like, each thing I did had a meaning, and it was because of something. It was because I needed to get somewhere, or or do something.
What about with the all of us around? Like, and that was something that I noticed myself. I'm thinking, if I was in that state of fatigue and I'm around other people continuously and everyone's sort of just being generally nice, and someone might only ask you one question, but when 100 people ask you that one question, each person thinks, I only asked him one question, but it's 100 people and you're tired and you've got to put on this face like, oh, I can't be grumpy to all these people because they're going to just think I'm, whatever. But ultimately you are grumpy, you are tired. And you're like, oh, just leave me alone. Did that not annoy you?
I guess, yeah, it gets quite tough. But yeah, as you kind of say, you don't want to be, you don't want to like make someone think that, you're not a good guy or whatever. So you do have to do your best to put on a good face. And yeah, maybe there was a couple of times that I was just like, I had to say that I just got to keep moving. I can't talk at this point in time, whatever. But I think most people understood that. But yeah, I think it's so hard for people to kind of understand, I guess, your headspace because you can't see that on the outside. No one knows what you're thinking, and I don't think anyone understands like how intense like my mind is when I'm doing these challenges. There's like so much going on, there's so much mental energy being used, and like putting aside that kind of mental energy to talk to people, to socialize, just isn't something that I'd put first. That's kind of something which is forgotten about. So yeah, I think that was a big challenge for me to handle that well and to be as nice as I possibly could.
Let's talk about that mental state. And I asked you just before, did the static get put on? The mind-numbing static, or you go to a meditative state? And if it did get put on, when was that moment, and why did you decide it was time to get the static on? I'm talking about the static in your ears.
Yeah, so yeah, I definitely used it a couple times, and yeah, it's like it needs quite a specific kind of mindset to be able to work. It only kind of worked on some of the longer kind of bike packing segments I had to do in between these locations we needed to be at. And it only works for me when I'm kind of tired, but I need to get somewhere, but it's going slow. I'm getting tired and I'm losing focus. So then I put the static on and it just phases me out. It's almost like, and when it works well, it kind of like makes you teleport to like a couple hours ahead, and you just kind of boost ahead and time flies super quickly. And yeah, I think over the past couple of years I've kind of learned when the moment is good for that TV static sound to help me phase out. But yeah, I think I used it on the first day, and then on day 4 I believe it was.
What about the downhills? We did something in the area of 2.5 to 3 hours of downhill. I can't remember, what was it?
I think my time was 2 hours 50, so yeah, quite a lot of downhill.
So that's downhill time. Like, we only got timed on the time we went downhill, and most of the runs were around 3 minutes, and the longest one was, I think you said you did 15 minutes for the longest one. I was probably like 20, which is huge. Like, that's something new I was understanding about downhill, is like, when I originally talking to someone about it, they're like, oh yeah, like longest ones are like 10 minutes, aren't they, or something like that. But I understand during the week, 10 minutes, that's so long. Like, a couple of minutes is great. Like 3-4 minutes is like a nice sort of period. You're pretty tired at the end of that. So 3 hours of a lot of downhill, that was a lot of downhill for me. But when you were tired, did you find out some new techniques, or did you notice some new things about yourself going downhill in this ultra fatigued phase? You talked about using the static to sort of zone out when you're riding, but obviously you can't zone out when you're going downhill. You have to be fully switched on. How did that go?
Yeah, so the big thing for me, and a technique I kind of implemented, was knowing when to conserve and use energy. So when I was biking between all the stages, that was like conserving energy and just using the least amount of mental and physical energy I possibly could. And then for the stages going downhill, that was when I obviously turned on that energy, and that was kind of when I used it to its full potential. And how I kind of flicked the switch was actually kind of a physical way, I guess. So about 5 minutes before getting to the top of the stage, I'd put on my gloves, and that was like, yeah, we're getting close. And then I'd kind of like start to hype myself up a bit. And then just before starting the stage, I would flick the lever on my shock, like to unlock it. So that, that's actually obviously something I need to do anyway. But just flicking the switch on that shock was like, in my head, flicking a switch, kind of saying it's go time and let's go get this. So that's kind of how I turned off, and then I did the opposite at the bottom of the stage to turn off again. And that's kind of how I kept my mind happy and kind of kept it alive and kept it focused.
Do you think that actually helped? I'm thinking about it now because like on a long bikepacking trip, and you can probably compare this to European stuff, I know it's different, but was that sort of nice? You could segment the trip down. Like for instance, if you just said, I'm going to do this 6-day bikepacking trip, and whatever the numbers were, I don't know, 600k, or maybe it was more, I don't know. It would have just only been about that static sort of mentality, getting through and zoning out. But this way, you could actually break it down. There were moments of intense, but then you probably enjoyed the zone out bit. But then at the end of the zone out bit, you're like, oh, the intense bit's going to be great. And then it was just like a continual change up.
Yeah, totally. It's always good doing that. I think like the key thing for me is just putting it into manageable kind of bite-sized chunks, and those kind of chunks kind of depends on how I'm feeling. Like if I'm feeling good, I might look ahead to a few hours and what I've got to go in a few hours. But if I'm quite tired, I might only look to like 20 minutes ahead and just get to that corner, just get to that lampshade, or get to the light post, or just something like that. And
what about fueling? Let's talk about the week. And you're a vegetarian, you don't drink coffee. How did you fuel this week? And I guess we've touched on this already on how you fuel normally, but I'd be really interested to know how you fueled, and whether you fueled specifically, like you said, a bit of a switch with your bike and your gloves and things like that. Was fueling a part of that? I'm only going to eat when I drop into a trail, I'm only going to eat after a trail, I'm saving that water for then, or you just did it when you felt hungry?
So I guess on that note of going into stages, when I got about 15 minutes before a stage, I would have a gel, or I'd have a bar, or just like a snack. And I guess that was mainly so that when I got to the bottom of that stage, I could just keep on biking, and I knew that I'd be fueled for the next 30 minutes, an hour, whatever that would be. But what kept me going was just, we were actually quite lucky with the location, that we were quite close to a city at most of the time, so had access to a good supermarket. One night even managed to go out for dinner, so yeah, that actually worked quite well. But I think the biggest phase of not having a shop was 24 hours. In that kind of phase, I bought a lot of bars with me, I had quite a few gels, had like a few bananas and a few lollies as well. But I think I kept the food quite clean, and I'm quite happy with how I fueled myself this week. There wasn't many moments where I bonked out or thought I'm out of food and this isn't good.
What about equipment? You couldn't take a lot. When I saw you, your backpack looked no bigger than anyone else's who was riding just for a day. And most people just had a bladder in there and, maybe a small jacket if it got cold at the top of the hill, or I don't know what else they had in there. Some people had massive bags, don't know what they were taking, but your bag was pretty small. Tell me about your gear, things you had in there, and then I guess in reflection, things you wish you'd brought or you didn't need.
Yeah, I think, as you say, like my bag was about the same size as most other people's bags, and I think the only additional stuff I would have had was a bivy bag, a sleeping mat, and a puffer jacket. I think all the other stuff like a water bladder, food, power bank. I think I maybe had some additional charging cables compared to other people. Yeah, I kept it quite minimal, and I guess the only additional stuff I had was sleeping gear. And the only thing to keep me warm was basically just a jacket and a puffer jacket, which in hindsight was quite on the light side. There were some cold nights out there, lots of shaking and not a whole lot of sleep at some points.
Tell me about the first night. You mentioned it to me that you got pretty cold, and what you were thinking then about the whole trip, because you're like, wow, this is the first night. I didn't bring that stuff. It's not like it's going to get much warmer here in the night time. Tell us about that night, and then how that sort of changed your mindset, or maybe scared you for the week, or prepared you for the week that was coming ahead.
Yeah, so that first night, like, we hadn't even made it to the first, like, competition day of the week, and I got, like, almost no sleep. I just stayed awake the whole night, just shaking, like, huddled up in a ball, doing my best to keep myself warm, and that was like a whoa moment, like, this isn't going to be good, like, this isn't going to be a fun week by any means, and I don't even know if I can survive it. Like, that was a fairly warm night in terms of what we had coming up for the week, and I hadn't coped well, and it was only going to get worse, basically. So I was scared, and you know, I was happy to keep on chugging along. I honestly didn't have any other option to get other gear, so I was just stuck with what I had and had to make do with that. So I guess it was kind of just getting in my head mentally that, yeah, this is going to be tough, and we've got to work it out, and I've got to do my best to to make it happen. And I think the second night was the coldest out of all of them. I slept at the top of a mountain, and yeah, it was that one felt quite dire, and it was like maybe getting onto the point where I was thinking maybe I need to get some help here, but I mean, I survived, so I can't complain now.
Were you as cold as the Highland 550?
Nah, not that cold. That one was like maybe fully survival, like that was kind of survival instincts kicked in, whereas this one was like there were people kind of camping where I was camping, so I kind of had the option to maybe like say, oh, okay, I'm just gonna ask for a jacket, and then this part isn't gonna be self-supported. Like I'd be able to keep on going, but I may have just had to kind of, in my eyes, cheat and kind of accept a jacket or accept more clothes or get them to turn on a heater. But I still would have kept going, but you know, that wouldn't have been self-supported at that point.
Would you have, obviously you would have just absolutely hated that, because it's weird, you set these things in our own minds and no one else would know about it. Only you would have known that. You could have never lived with yourself, could you?
Yeah, I mean, that was night 2, and I still had 4 days after that, and in my eyes the challenge would be over at that point. Like, if I had taken help, it wouldn't have been self-supported, and that would kind of defeat the whole purpose of the mission I was on. So like I still could have kept going, but like it would have been over in my head. There wouldn't have been the motivation to dig as deep or to push as hard, and it would have just made it a lot easier to maybe accept other help later on if I got into other situations.
What were some other little interesting, challenging moments along the week? You spoke about some animals, you know, I can imagine there was some other moments where that would have twisted your arm about, I'm close, maybe not as close as that, but some tempting moments to just, they might have only been sort of flash sort of moments where you thought, I'd love to do that, and you're like, nah, I'm not doing it.
I think one of the deepest moments I had to push, and it was kind of also, yeah, there was some other external kind of factors which led to me pushing that deep, was in the kayak. So in the kayak, I had a support boat with me. They weren't helping me, they were there more for my safety, because we were super far out at sea, we were in pitch black.
Well, wait, just before you do that, I forgot to talk about that, the kayak. Just explain quickly before you go into that what the kayak trip was, because we haven't explained that at all. There was a nice little ferry ride to get across this bay, which was lovely. We did the next morning, but you set off in the afternoon or in the evening.
Yeah, so the whole idea of the kayak kind of started by looking at what all the other competitors would be doing, and on their schedule they had a boat which would take them over the harbour, so it would save them a shuttle, and they'd be able to have a nice kind of morning on the boat, kind of watching the sun come up. So I kind of looked at that and I was like, there could be an opportunity here, and I ended up coming up with the idea to kayak over the bay, so which is about 50 odd K over the bay in the middle of the sea. And a few months ago I kind of hadn't kayaked before. I had to buy a kayak specifically for this. It was kind of one of the biggest challenges I've ever had, just kind of leading up to this, getting kayak fit, because man, like, paddling in water is like so difficult, and yeah, I committed to it and I managed to pull it off in the end, but it wasn't without a few hard moments. And yeah, as I touched on just before, I had a boat with me who was kind of making sure that I was safe, and also helped me with the navigation, since it was getting quite difficult out there to navigate.
What happened to watching the star theory?
it was a bit too cloudy, and turns out the stars actually moved a lot more than I thought. So it was good, yeah, to start with, but then the stars kind of shifted and it wasn't that good. But yeah, anyway, so the safety boat, I said, like, they kind of were like telling me, oh, you're like a quarter of the way there, you're halfway there. And I think once they said you've got a quarter of the way left, I'd worked out a quarter was maybe 8 kilometers. So I'd, like, on my Garmin watch, I had like, I'd kind of said, like, once I get to maybe 35 Ks, I'm gonna be there. So I hit 35 Ks on my Garmin. I'm like, how far to go? Are we there yet? Like, can we see the shore yet? And they're like, you've got 6K to go. And that, like, 6K for me in a kayak is maybe about an hour and a half. Like, we had a big headwind. I was moving slow, and since I had a headwind, I was having to work so hard to push against the wind, the waves, and all that. And I only had, like, yeah, I had nothing left in me. And the swell was so bad that I couldn't kind of stop and kind of get out the food I had, which was inside the kayak. So I was without food, without water, and once I had thought I'd finished, basically, I still had about another hour and a half to go in some difficult conditions. So yeah, I just had to bite the teeth together and just get back to work and suck that one up, which was hard. Like that, I dug so deep physically and so deep mentally.
It's just like, the only thing I can compare it to is you're coming up this mountain, and like on the road I'm talking about now, or even on a gravel ride, and you can see the crest. You're like, yes, it's over. And you get around that top corner and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not even close to the top. This mountain just keeps going. And like you said, you're empty, you got nothing left. Was it like, I don't know, what was the effort you were putting out like? Was it like climbing a hill? Because when you stop on a hill, well, you maybe go backwards if you stop, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly. So the tide and the swell, the tide and the wind was pushing against me, basically. So if I stopped paddling, I'd be moving backwards. In that kind of setting, I guess, in those conditions, I had to just always keep moving forward, always just keep working anyway. So there was no way I could stop and chill out for 5 minutes, because then I'd be set back another 5 minutes and have to paddle to gain that back. So I just had to dig deep and keep moving forward, and I just, I wasn't in a position that I was expecting to have to do that, and I just had to, which was the hard part.
What about when you saw the shore? How far away from the shore could you finally see it, and that feeling like, you can see the crest of the top of the climb, and you get this extra sort of motivation because you know it's going to be over? When was that moment? Was it really close, or from quite a far way out that it really motivated you in?
It was maybe about a kilometre. So the bay I was paddling into was quite a long bay. So by the time I got to kind of the cliffs that were at the end of the bay, got into the bay, the ocean had just completely calmed down. It was so sheltered, and it was just all of a sudden so calm. Like before that, it was so intense. It was the gnarliest conditions I've ever kayaked in, and I'm a novice kayaker, so like it doesn't take much to kind of get me scared. And this is also at the middle of the night. Like it was dark. I couldn't see anything, so it was so full on. And then I got into that bay, the water had just calmed down, and man, that was an amazing feeling, just being able to just take a chill pill basically and zone out and just be like, yeah, that's it. Like I've made it. Like that's the end of it. Like that's the hardest thing I've maybe ever done in my life, and yeah, that's the end. Like I was stoked.
There was no moments in that though where you thought about having a bit of a reach out and a bit of a like, guys, just tow me along for a bit, let me hang on to the boat, give me some food?
I think it's the same thing we touched on before. If I accepted that help, like it would have been over for me.
Did the thought enter your mind, or it just never entered your mind?
I think I'd kind of set some guidelines in my head where, like, if it got this bad, like I'm gonna call it there, or like if I fell in and couldn't get back in the kayak, like I'm gonna need some help. But if it kind of kept on going the way it was going, I was never gonna take any support. But if it got into a situation where I was gonna be put in danger or anything like that, then I was willing to kind of take help to save myself.
Let's talk about the end of the rally, and actually we've forgotten about this too, is actually the race.
let's talk about the race side of it. You were racing as well, and the guys you were racing were pretty skillful riders. They weren't chumps like me out there. These guys were hauling down the trails as well. They're, world-class riders. So you had your work cut out for you. Apart from your own, self sort of goal you wanted to achieve, and you wanted to go down the trails as fast as you could, I'm assuming you wanted to win the rally as well. And you were leading from day one, and then there was, it was getting close. Tell me a little bit about the race side of things and how that either motivated you, or I don't know what that did to the challenge itself, having the race involved and having to continually perform on every single trail.
Yeah, so I guess after I think to begin with, it was a big unknown with how I would place. It was kind of just like, see how day one goes, and then we've got a starting point, and then we can work out kind of, am I going to go for the win? Am I going to go for a top 5, a top 10 or whatever? But on day one, I ended up winning that by, I believe, 50 seconds. And I think that day was about a 55-minute day in terms of stage time. So when you look at that at a percent, that's maybe 1% or, thereabouts. I don't exactly know, but 50 seconds on a day like that, it's a small margin. So I was up, but not by a huge amount. At that point, there was a lot of weight on my shoulders. I kind of knew that if I could win this whole event, like how insane that could be. And I guess at that point, that was the goal, but I had to keep in mind that was day one, that was the best I was going to feel all week, and that I was only going to feel worse, and that, these guys weren't going to get much slower, so I had to kind of keep meeting that level. And I think the other difficult part is that this course was designed to kind of be suitable for all levels. So that meant there were lots of kind of blues, lots of kind of easier, flatter stuff, which meant...
Hang on a second here. I'm going to butt in here. I don't know about that. It was pretty gnarly out there, but yes, maybe at your level, it was toned back a bit.
Yeah, well, yeah, there was some, let's just say there was a lot more physical stages that I'm used to. So there's lots of stages with lots of pedaling in them, and my whole goal is to keep my heartbeat down, to keep it low, keep the intensity low, and to not have to dig deep into my legs. But I quickly kind of found out that just wasn't going to cut it if I wanted to be quick. So I was having to dig deep, work hard, and my legs were just getting absolutely toasted within like the first day, and then even more on the second day. Yeah, it was a tough one for me, just having to work so much harder than I thought I'd need to, which like in the stages, but then that meant that I was a lot more tired for then having to bike to the next location. So it was just kind of maybe a lose-lose for me. Like, yeah, I had my work cut out for me.
Let's go to the end then, because you did win the rally, and you had a 2-minute buffer coming into the last stage, which, like you said, overall that time, it's probably not heaps. And I don't know, I'd like to know what you're thinking coming into the last stage about the race, with the levels of fatigue, and obviously wanting to do the double, complete it, physically, the mission, but also the double is win the rally. And the guys were getting pretty fast on the last day, and it was not a massive day the last day, but there was still some long trails in there, two sort of, I say 10 minutes because that's sort of how long it took me, but two sort of longer downhill sectors with a bit of one that had quite a lot of pedaling in it, some uphill bits. So I guess take me through the last day, and then that feeling of like, wow, this could all be over here right at the line. Like any race, you got to go right to the finish line.
Yeah, so I think even just the whole week, it's kind of a big mix up between knowing when to push and knowing when to play it safe. But especially coming down to the last day, being in the lead and only having a 2-minute buffer, and like 2 minutes is a lot of time, but if you fall off, have a mechanical, hurt yourself, whatever, 2 minutes can disappear so quickly. So I still needed to go quick, but I needed to play the last day safe, just to not have any kind of mechanicals, to not fall off. And yeah, that was kind of the plan of attack on the last day. So the last day wasn't the quickest for me. I mean, I was still up there, but I definitely wasn't that close to the win. But yeah, the weight on my shoulders not to fall off was just insane. Like, it's not a good feeling, like being at the top of the stage and you're telling yourself, don't fall off. Like, that's just not what you want to be thinking about. But
Welcome to my world, mate.
yeah, well, there you go.
Tell me about it. Last night we had the big presentation, and you went up there, stood on the top step of the dais. That feeling that it's all done. You even did a shoey, which is a bit of a tradition in the mountain bike world, I think. How did it all feel last night, or maybe even this morning?
Yeah, it's a weird one finishing like this. Like, the last 6 days has been so intense, like always on the move, always having to do something, always having to think about the next step. Like, you know, what's going to happen this afternoon, what's happening in the morning, where do I need to be, what time? And then to finish it and to not have to think about anything at all. It's like, so what do I actually do now? Like, what is there to do? Like,
you can drive me back to Christchurch.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, well, I'm glad this is keeping me occupied, because I mean, yeah, I don't know what I'd be doing otherwise. Like, just a whole bunch of nothing, just kind of like, what am I doing with my life, kind of thing. Which, I mean, it sounds quite stupid, but like, I think I find with these things there's always a big low, because it's like you've been thinking about this goal for the last few months. You tick it off, or you don't tick it off. But luckily in this case I did. But then it's like, it's done. Like, that's what you've been thinking about, and now you don't need to think about it anymore. So what do you do? What do you think about? I think that's the tough one, and I imagine lots of other people have kind of had similar things with that. But I mean, it's good to be finished, but yeah, now I don't know what to do with myself.
When's the high? You know, when's the moment that you work towards? Is it just continually during the mission, and those mini highs you get along the way, like, yes, I made it to the top of that climb, or, you know, like you said, I got across the harbour, or I got a great time down that trail? Or is it just is there an end high for you? Like, yes, I did it, it's over. Is it quickly over for you, that high, like you said, or does it still linger on in these few days?
I think for me, it's like the highs maybe when it gets tough. It's like when you kind of get to a tough situation and you beat that, it's like, yeah, I did that. And I kind of know, like, I don't know, I don't want to like put myself on a pedestal here, but it's like, when it gets hard, like, you know, that's when other people are going to turn back. But if you can kind of get past that hard bit, like, you're putting yourself ahead. You are kind of becoming a better person or whatever. And I think that's kind of what pushes me along, is like, I want to be the better person. I want to keep pushing on. I want to win. I want to, you know, I want to be the best I can be. And it's always about kind of pushing myself to become better, and kind of working out my mind, working out how I can push my mind to get me to survive those situations, and to, you know, work out these issues I'm facing. And I think that's kind of the satisfaction I gain with these challenges, is, yeah, the challenge, and then working out how to overcome that.
It's a big question. You already alluded to it, that maybe you don't know the answer to this, but I'm more thinking not necessarily next week, next month, next year. I'm thinking, you know, the future of Matt Fairbrother, like the 10-year plan. You know, not that everyone does that, but you also have something scratched out in the back of your mind, I guess, because you are 19 now and you're doing some massive missions. I more say, like, you're only 19, not you're the old age of 19. You're only 19. So I think these missions, you know, how big can they become? Do you do 2 times, you know, the rallies? You know, what is it next year? You know, how do you beat yourself? How do you continually push the envelope for you? I think you made a really good point that the competition needs to stay there. It's something really unique that you've got, but it sounds like from all these adventures, whether it's going to the EWS, there's a new purpose. It's not just about doing another massive mission. The competition is a mission, trying to beat the best in the world. So all that wrapped up is, where do you see yourself going in in the future?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, and I mean, I've obviously got some ideas, some quite ambitious, and some others that I'm confident about. But I think where I want to take it is, I guess, an extension of what I've just done, and combining that, I guess, the kind of long form of, I guess, bikepacking, you could call it, of that long kind of physical efforts, but then combining that with, you know, the time downhill sections, because those are the 2 things I love. And I think this is maybe the first time to this level someone's combined that in mountain biking. So I kind of want to, I think ideally I'd love to see some other people jump on board this kind of thing and maybe even come up with a new discipline or just have some more competitions so that we can all get pushed along. And I think that's the huge goal that I'd like to see in the next 10 years is, potentially a new discipline of the sport.
Have you seen other people reach out to you, whether they're competitors, whether they're race organisers, and say something like, I think there's actually legs in this, I would like to do it, or we'd like to run something like that, or you're just speculating that might happen? Is there interest, is what I'm saying?
Well, if you look at the EWS, like the World Cups maybe 5 years ago, they were huge days. They were climbing about 2,000 metres each day. So if you look at 5 years ago, the sport was more close to that like to what I had just done, but still nowhere near that level, but it was much closer. And in the past 5 years or so, it's gone a lot more compact and a lot more, say, downhill focused. So I think there is still demand for that adventure kind of side of things too. I just think we need like someone to we need like a catalyst to kind of get that fire started again. And honestly, that's kind of what I'm hoping to do here, and hoping to start the fire. That's what I'm hoping to push.
That's awesome. I guess lastly, mate, what about for you personally? Like mentally, you already said that these missions are, this idea that you've got, it does a lot for you and allows you to have some time to sort of figure out your own mind and things like that. Where do you want to go with yourself? Like, what do you want to achieve with yourself? What do you want to, coming out of this? It's only, you've had a lot of time and you're still processing what happened on this last mission, things you've learnt about yourself, things you want to work on, things like that. Where do you want to go personally?
I mean, that's a huge question, isn't it? But I think I always am just wanting to find the next thing which is going to push myself and allow me to become a better person. I think this challenge I've just done, it wasn't the hardest I've ever gone in my life, but I think it's the best performance I've had with my mind in terms of like decision making and making sure it all just worked and clicked. And I'm super happy with like how my mind performed and how I thought and all that. So I learned so much off this event and so much mental gains, and I'm just hoping to kind of keep building on that, keep finding the next challenge which is going to push my mind and keep me thinking and keep me working to figure out that puzzle. So I think that's just what I'm on the hunt for, that next challenge to make me think and work.
Mate, it's been a pleasure to be around you the last week and watch you from afar, but also you've let me inside your little bubble, and I've really appreciated your honesty, especially with the physical, technical bike stuff. But also I think you've really opened up in this trip to me, and maybe that's just who you are, but it's rubbed off on me a lot, and I think you rubbed off on a lot of the people in the competition. So not only did you do this mission for yourself, but a lot of people learnt a lot out of you. So thanks a lot for coming having me on the ride with you and sort of chatting about all this.
Thanks so much for having me along. It's been awesome to talk to someone who I guess understand some of this and to be able to bounce ideas and just exchange knowledge, because you've taught me a heck of a lot as well. So thank you.
Okay, what an absolute legend. He really is an enigma. I don't know how he does it. Go across and follow Matt on his socials. He's really cool to watch, going downhill, plus all the adventures that he does. I have to say a massive thanks to Pock, who are really looking after both Matt and I over there in New Zealand. Mostly me really, because at the end of the day, I did break 2 helmets after all, but those guys are great. I love working with them. Big thanks goes out to our major partner here at Life in the Peloton, MAAP, Red Bricks Media, and the Life in the Peloton team. Of course, you guys for listening as well. And I would love to see you guys over at the Pelo membership. Sign up today to receive your limited edition Life in the Peloton book. Now, there's only a limited number of these guys, so make sure you get your hands on one and sign up. All the members who have signed up, theirs is going to be coming out to them in the next few weeks. Until next time, guys, take it easy and cheers.
that iconic music in this episode was composed by none other than the legend, Pete Shelley. Cheers, mate.